All right. That's great. Okay. It was a strange notification I just got just now. So we're here to talk
Yes, we are.
intergenerational conversations. This is kind of like what happens quite a bit around our kitchen island, but about
Absolutely.
rural Ontario, Darius. And so rural Ontario in color, when I was sort of thinking about a mother-son intergenerational conversation, we've got 2.5 years of skin in the game in Ontario. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about. So first, let's start talking about a little bit of what we know about rural Ontario in true mama style. I did a little bit of research, and because we're new to this scene here in London, in and around the city of London in Ontario, anyhow, I found out that after 1980, in all of rural Ontario, that migration and immigration stayed like relatively steady at anywhere between 11 to 13% increase year over year. Whereas prior to that, we could see, 50% over year, over, depending on
Yeah.
when we're looking at the history. And based on that, we know that migrants within Ontario make up 90% of any immigration into rural. Any population increase is attributed to migrants from Ontario. Migrants from other provinces only consist of 6%. And then international migrants constitute 4%. So that's sort of the overall demographics of like who's coming in.
Yeah.
Now, this is based on 2021 stats. So the census, as you may know, Deke, runs on a cycle. The next one
Yeah.
comes out 2026. So we have some time to really see what's going on. In 2021, the overall rural population was just under 2.5 million
Okay.
across Ontario. Now, this is the interesting part. The median age of people in rural areas is 47 years of age compared to about 44 with urban populations. Now, ironically, our area is about 44%. Sorry, not 44%, pardon. Our area is 44 years is the median in the county. Um, I'm curious on maybe it's the proximity to the city that younger folks are coming out. I'm not sure. But I do know that this has been a misleading age because people, Indigenous folks across Indigenous communities that lace what we call London, have a much younger median of 31. And so the other thing I found out, which I thought I knew, I just didn't know the figure. Can you guess what the number, the GDP, the percentage of the GDP that rural Ontarians contribute? Or sorry, this is a stat for Canada. So across Canada, rural communities, what do you think is the what pardon? What do you think rural Canada generates as GDP contribution to Canada's economy?
Um, I mean, I wouldn't be able to give you a solid figure, but I would assume it's in the billions, just because Canada's a big part of our GDP is our agricultural sector. So I
What do
would
you think
assume
that is in percentage?
percentage. Uh, I would say at least a few percent.
Yeah,
Um,
so it's 2070.
20.
I'll save you your misery here.
Okay.
It's
I don't know the
27%.
best. Okay.
So stats out of the way, that's what we know. This is what sort of the context of like who's going in, who's going out, who's staying, what's the age, and what are the contributions. Unfortunately, I hate to frame things this way. You know how irritated I get by ultra capitalistic framing of people, but this is what is the contribution. So we've got 2.5 years skin in the game. What are your initial reflections of living in the county?
So honestly, for someone my age, my initial reflection is I've more so loved it. Coming from pretty much an entire urban life, it's been a great experience being out here. And I don't want to say that we're truly ruralistic. We're not like thousands, hundreds. Yeah.
It is kind of fake country. I'm not
Yeah.
gonna lie. We are kind of
No, but
living the
we are
fake
no,
country life.
but
Yeah.
we are rural. We're outside city limits. We don't have the same amenities that a lot of urban folks do have. So I would definitely still consider us to be in rural Ontario. We still have to drive a pretty substantial distance to get to grocery stores and such. Um, but I mean, from my personal life and my personal opinion, the way that I see things is, um, I enjoy the quiet life. I enjoy the private life. So I think this has been probably, the greatest, pretty much greatest move that we've made. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah, 100%.
That's really interesting.
The thing is, like, living in because we're originally from Ottawa, um, and
Are we?
well, like,
Do you remember your life? Like, are
well,
you
no, not
okay?
not not not
Like,
originally not originally from Ottawa, but I mean, like, we're coming from Ottawa into the rural life, like that's where that's where we're coming from.
yes, yes.
And we had that suburban Ottawa experience, and that's a lot of my core memories are there. I'm not gonna discredit any of that life. That lifestyle was, I liked it, but I think it was more so just that suburban feeling. I just didn't like it. There was just too many people in everybody else's business, and I wanted to have like that kind of secluded lifestyle where you have neighbors. You can have great relationships with the people around you. You can have those relationships just point blank period, but you don't have to have those relationships at the same time. You can choose to say hello or not. You don't have to make that awkward eye contact every single time you walk outside to somebody who's 2 feet away from you. Um,
Mm.
you
Okay,
know,
let's talk about building community. I'm just joking. You know what? I can't even knock you for that sentiment, but
no,
sorry. I'm joking with you only because, we there's this narrative that you build community in and around your home.
no,
And I think for racialized people, that's a little bit of a different story
no,
because our home are coveted spaces, and we've had some really interesting interactions. When I think that's perhaps where your perspective and lens around people being in your business and not having the privacy and safety and sort of the
no.
sanctity of your home honored. And so I get it. And through that lens, I get it. But through the lens of community building, boy, is it ever hard in
Yeah,
comparison.
yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. It's definitely a lot harder. It's pretty thin out here when it comes to wanting to have that community built. Um, but I think what we're seeing now, especially since we're looking at an insanely growing population over the last few years, we're gonna start seeing that community, probably built in the next 5-10 years. We're gonna start to see a lot more people come to where we are, because we're not that far out of the city, so they're definitely going to build out, and start to build up where we are. So I think we're going to have that opportunity to see those communities built, and have that, and sort of have that opportunity to kind of see Arva or Balamot or whatever we are.
I can hear you now. That was weird. Sorry,
Okay.
you can pick up that last thought, please.
Yep. Hold on. Can you hear me now? Am I going through the headphones?
Yes, you are. No, you're not. So sorry. Don't eek. The young person can't be the technological problem in this scenario, Darius.
Okay, so
Continue where your thought left off. You were saying about regardless of what we consider ourselves to be, we're going to see community. That's what I heard last. Like,
yeah,
I see the urban sprawl. So you're talking about urban sprawl.
yeah. So the urban sprawl is definitely a reality out here. We're going to start seeing it in the next 5-10 years, and I think we are going to have that opportunity to have that community building experience. We're going to start to see more schools, more infrastructure built out here, but it needs, it's been needed to,
No, I get what you're saying. I think that what you're, despite the, I think inequities in infrastructure, division of infrastructure money is being, inequitably divided between rural and urban communities. What you're saying is that you're in the next 5 to 10 years, you would predict that there will be far more interconnectedness between those economies. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
Yeah.
Hold that thought, because I'd like to, I want, you want to know what I think of living in the county? I want to talk about my trauma for a moment here, because when we moved here, we did do our homework. Just so you know, Daddy and I did our homework. We called up our internet service provider, and at that time, we all heard, that we're going to be fine. And this was at the peak. So we moved July of 2021. The province started to open back up with COVID phase. I think we were at like phase 1-ish, around, start around June of 2021. So I needed to work remotely and safely, but I had the option of going on site, thank goodness, because no internet. We came here, and I, in my wildest dreams, never thought I would be back to circa 2004, 2006 speeds in this lifetime again. And it was really problematic. I remember, oh my goodness, I had this presentation with the Law Society of Ontario, and I thought, I'm ready to pack this house up, 6 of us plus little Leo, and move, because I was infuriated at how I couldn't even manage a stable conversation with a 30-minute presentation built in. It was just such an impediment on my life at the time. But as far as otherwise, my mood, because we can choose and we have the privilege, right? The difference between, I think, many families and us at this moment is that we have the privilege of going into town for our amenities. And London, most of our amenities were met. Most of our cultural amenities were not. So we're kind of in the same boat. That's slowly changing. Now we can't find our meat at a decent price. We have to travel 200 kilometers down the highway to buy meat that's appropriate. But I think that's going to slowly change. So in my perspective, I love this concept of living in fake country and having the privilege and the access to, get amenities in the city, yet, we get to wave at our wonderful neighbors and look at this beautiful greenery and so on. So, my fear is, though we're on about an acre and a half, we're utilizing some of it. If you remember, we had our own butternut squash. We're eating a lot of the stuff that Daddy grows. I take no responsibility, as you know, nothing. I only keep humans and animals alive. I somehow missed the mark on agriculture and farming and having that green thumb, but we do utilize the space somewhat. It is challenging because of the septic system to really do more with our space. However, it is, to me, a bit of a situation where I know right across the street, the 9 acres are going to have new builds. And is that going to be the same vibe in the next 5 years? Are we going to still feel that serenity, that peace? My inkling is that probably not. We're going to have a different experience, and it'll come with its good things and its bad things. So, yeah, initial reactions of county life versus city life. I'm really impressed to hear that you think it's the smartest move we've made. We'll pat myself on the shoulder. As far as the move, and this is after you picked the house in Ottawa, and the neighborhood in Ottawa. So that is, I'm surprised.
Yeah.
How do you feel about talking a little bit? Well, what else is on your mind about county life?
Well, for me, it's and it's actually quite interesting. Like, I want to kind of speak to your final remark about you don't think it's going to be the same at all, or over the next 5-10 years. So I can definitely see how it's not going to be the same, but I still feel like we're going to have, like, as long as we hold on to what we got, I don't think we're going to, I mean, we can kind of still have that same vibe. But as we still have those houses being built on the other side, I think it's still going to bring a lot more amenities that we do need, though, at the same time. Like, we're going to have, we don't have sewage.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
septic.
like, we're on septic tanks, as you said. So, like, there is going to be some positives to that. It's going to open up a lot of our capabilities of, I don't know, using the washrooms as many times as we need to.
Cheer. You're acting like we're not in no like camp here, all right? Like we're good.
Obviously not. Obviously, or like doing the laundry, like
Yeah.
sometimes, we have to kind of be mindful of what we're doing for laundry. But
Yeah.
yeah, but I mean, I also wanted to, quickly ask you a question,
Yeah.
from a parent's perspective.
Ooh. Can I
Obviously,
have that in writing? I don't often get this questions from a parent's perspective. I love this. Go ahead. All of it.
so I've had my fair share of experiences throughout my life.
Hmm.
I've socially, both, when it comes to, racial experiences, when it comes to, gender and such, just throughout my entire life. There's been, obviously, we're starting to kind of have more of an understanding, and we're starting to teach things, a lot more than even what I was able to see, and I'm super young. Um, so even with that, like, how do you see there being, or do you even see there being a substantial difference, in how I was raised, and how, the kind of experiences that I had living pretty much all my life in an urban setting, in contrast to how my siblings will sort of see things around them, and how they're going to be raised, and the kind of values they're going to be instilled with, because obviously there's going to be a different childhood, not so much of a different childhood, but different experiences, different social settings they're going to find themselves in, more than likely. So, like, how do you think it kind of plays out, uh,
Mm,
up
I like
until,
that question.
yeah.
Well, you know what? Rural or urban or not, you know what they say, Darius, is that the parent, like each child has a different parent, even though they're the same mom and dad, because, I'm a human too. And so, 21 years ago, if you don't mind me aging you, 21 years ago, I was a different person. So inevitably, these children, you have three younger siblings, are going to have a different experience than you did. 100%, just by the sheer fact that your father and I, daddy and I, are two different and completely evolved human beings, like from where we were. Mind you, we were great young folks, I have to say. Like, we were young parents that quickly got into the stride of parenting you, and we had 8 years of solo time with you. So that alone, okay, like, do you even know how privileged you are for that time, like, alone? Yeah, I'm glad that you see the benefit of that, because you had a lot of adults pouring a lot of time over you. And so, the same people are pouring the love into these children's lives. Mind you, we're in a completely different environment, and their lives are quite different. As you know, we had to take the children from a different school. Like, we've had to switch their schools because of what was um, what was conditions within the school and capacity of the educators at that school that couldn't meet the demand of the students and their families. And it was really challenging year for us. We were all like, I think I can name half of my white hairs on my head after that school year, because it was a very stressful one. So on one hand, so I was really nervous. I'm like, okay, I'm taking them from this French immersion. We were zoned to be able to go into London for the school and totally shift their education to English only, and bring them into a county school. And I was petrified. I don't know if you remember, I held my breath for like 8 weeks. I was like, oh my goodness, what's going to happen to these kids? Are they going to be safe? Are they going to make friends? Are the teachers going to see their full potential? And to our luck, we were able to see actually quite a bit of that, in terms of the educate, like, for their classes and their school to be as small as it is a real benefit for us, because we get to really change the hearts and minds of people that need those changes to happen, and we can be taken seriously. We've had a really positive experience in the school system with these kids so far in the county, in comparison to the 12 years I walked with you in the public school system between London and Ottawa. You spent your core public school years here in London at one school, and knew all of the kids. The community knew us, but it was really challenging. If you remember, like, we had teachers not like come to me and try to tell me certain things about you. And I thought, I know if a child displays these characteristics in 3 settings, then we need to explore it. But if it's only in this classroom, then the classroom's the issue. So immediately when you talk about parenting, my mind goes straight to the classroom and school, because kids are spending more time there than they are in their own households Monday to Friday, awake hours anyways. And so going back to, I'm ranting a little bit because I do think that there's one positive element of the county with their upbringing, one distinctly positive one for your father and I, which is that we get to know the educators and the educators get to know us. We get to see the families, and there is that proximity of knowing each other in a very smaller circle that gives people a certain heightened level of responsibility and accountability for their actions and behaviors. So there's definitely a lot more topical niceness now that we experience. Now, on the other hand, there's no community, park or neighborhood that, if you recall, I was a young mom that was a full-time student, and, we were really challenged economically. And so our excursions, if you recall, Darius, on like the weekends and stuff even on the weekdays rather, I'd take you to like construction sites and we'll look at the machines, the heavy machines moving about. I'd like not to the sites, but we would I would distinctly remember like packing sandwiches, and we'd go to where there's construction, and you were fascinated by these big locomotives, or we just go somewhere interesting and look at our surroundings. And it would be usually at local parks where we can go by bus. If I was in the same economic situations, your siblings would be doomed because there's no bus access. We've had to supply you with a vehicle to be independent and be able to meet your own needs. And so if we were in the same economic situation, I would say no. That's why, thankfully, you have had 3 different versions of your parents over time. And now we are who we are. We're just a little more tired. Our bodies ache a little more. But I do think that they will not have the same experience. They'll just have a unique one where they spend a tremendous amount of time outside. You did too, but accompanied by me. Like, I was tasked to come with you everywhere because we were in the city. Now we've got the kids could go out there and explore and play, and we have to sometimes remind them, right, to come in to eat and wash up and like live a different phase of their day. So, that's distinctly different than yours. And I think that that's pretty special. But the other piece is that, they don't get the same kind of going to their neighborhood grocer. We go all the way across the city because the grocer that's there has our ethnic products. So like life is a lot more inconvenient that way. But I think the stage of our lives, the timing of being in the county was right. So right now, if I want to choose to go down to like Picard's and get snacks for us, I can choose to do that. If I'm worried, I mean, God love the folks at Picard's, they're lovely, and I've never experienced anything odd there. But it took me some time to frequent these local establishments because I wasn't sure how well we were going to be received. Yeah. And it wasn't until I think 3 or 4 months that I actually went into these rural establishments because I built up the sort of the confidence and I practiced to face whatever it was. And so far, I would say that it hasn't been a deeply harmful experience other than come election time, because that was really alarming to see so much support for like really ultra right-wing politics, where I know that, that lens and perspective is resonating for a lot of the families here and individuals who vote. I also think that there's a deep disengagement. So that's annoying for me as far as the questions of like, how do I like a deeply engaged community. And that's why, and when I say deeply engaged, I mean, I want folks to show up and vote for what they want. Otherwise, zippa da lippa.
I can actually speak to that. Like, I worked the recent London election,
Yes.
I know, and there was 25% voter turnout for the entire election. I was there from, I think, 8 in the morning. Polls opened at 9 a.m. up until 9 p.m. or something like that. But we didn't get our first voter walked through the door after 11 a.m. Wild. So 2.5 hours of me just kind of just sitting there talking to the folks around me, and there was nobody wanted to show up. I had like maybe, in the entire area, like my riding was a pretty big,
It
uh,
was.
was a pretty big riding. Like it's, like Highbury North. Like it's a pretty big, it's a pretty big place with a lot of people in it. But we probably collectively only had a few hundred votes, which is obviously a fraction of the amount of people that live in this entire area. So
Yeah.
it's pretty alarming. And coming from a young person, I'm hoping that, speaking to the engagement point, that we do see that do see a spike in engagement and so, upward trends of that, because again, a lot of people have a lot to say about politics. A lot of people have opinions, and you would always want to wish that people exercise that civic right to go and vote each and every time that they have the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, again, zip of the lip, like you have to be able to
Are you going to use
understand.
that? Is that cool? Do I get cool points now because I said that? No, it's not. It won't go into the lexicon of Gen Z, eh? No doubt. Okay.
No, but yeah, no, I definitely agree, and that's honestly, I'm in university, I'm in poli sci, we're learning about these things, and a lot of the, the topic, a lot of the discussions, right now is how we contribute, as a young population to the political world, and how much we contribute in contrast to how much we're actually putting into it when it comes to votes.
Yeah.
And even the younger generations, we're kind of struggling because we have all these different priorities. We're seeing heightened levels of stress and anxiety with all these other priorities we have with work and school. We're disengaged with politics. There's just I've heard too many, and I can't even say that I've been a perfect human. That I've been perfectly engaged with everything. It does get overwhelming. There's a lot of things happening all over the world, all at the same time,
Oh yeah.
way too frequently to be
Yeah.
able to stay engaged. But I still try my very hardest. And again, I've also been privileged to be in a family where that is a pretty big. If we see something on the news, we're talking about it in the family. I might say a quick 1-2 sentence to
Spark up some. You drop these little things and then walk away and come back and see what you just caused, and then we talk about it. Right? That's
yeah,
what you do.
I might say a quick, couple of sentences, whether for or against the subject as a joke or whatever, just to spark some debate. But overall, it's really just to get us talking about the issue that's been presented to us. But I know for a fact, just within my group of friends, that that's not something that ever happens. We're seeing these huge global phenomenons happening, and I have people coming to me asking me questions about it because they have no idea what is happening. And things that are happening across the planet, yes, they're across the planet, but our government, we have our agenda, we have our our intentions. We have our political party in power, doing things that also has an influence on all of these things happening all over the globe. So you might have a perspective that is super against what is happening across the planet, or super for what is happening across the planet, no matter what it is. And you might not even know that your government is either supporting what you're against or is completely against what you're for, what you're advocating for. So I think there has to be, again, like we're starting to talk about how this can happen because it's such a complex issue. It's multifaceted for sure, but it's definitely down to how we can get that engagement going, and then on top of that, how we can kind of, I forgot the term for it, but how we can kind of get people to veer off of voting along their parents'
Family line.
their
Yeah.
family. That has
But let's put a pin in that for a second. Go back to, are you impacted? I mean, we're straying a little away from the conversation of rural versus sort of urban experiences, but what's the impact of the way that like dismantling of journalism is happening right now? Like, do you notice that? I know you didn't spend a whole lot of time on Facebook. You thought that was the thing of my generation, and you're like, no, thank you. I'm not engaging there. But there are direct links to news for the changes with the CRTC and some of the legislation that has allowed for this type of like completely blocking of information off of one major platform is really, really frightening. But also we're seeing some of these world events that you're talking about over time. We noticed this, but we're starting to really name it now, saying, we don't have a balanced media because we're not getting balanced information.
Yeah.
So, tell me, speak to me a little bit about that. And then I want to go back to this. If you were in the county during COVID, would you have still said like this is the best decision ever? I'm really curious about that. But tell me about this journalism and the world events, because I'm really curious about your thoughts around what's happening there with the way that the media is choosing to essentially take sides before giving information.
And that's another big thing that we're talking about in some of my university classes, specifically in Canadian foreign policy, and how media is a huge actor in how our policy is framed and how we sort of act as a global actor, as a state. And honestly, there's a huge disconnect on what, and I'm not going to say that all media is now taking sides, that there isn't objective forms of media out there still, but we're starting to see more and more of that subjective media that does take a side, that does have very specific vocabulary and how they decide to portray certain events. And it's appalling, and especially when it's about just horrific things that are happening. It's I don't want to say specific issues. I don't want to spark any right, but like
we're talking about world conflict. We're talking about global economic destruction, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like it's really down to their vocabulary. Like it's very, very easy to see, and people are unfortunately eating it up like it's like it's breakfast, lunch, and dinner. No matter where you are, urban or rural. I definitely do think that there is, and we can really connect this back, and I can definitely speak to this. Working in another rural community, even further from the city, people are definitely taking media in a whole different perspective than what people are taking it in an urban environment. I work in schools, so I work most of the time in a school within the city of London, and then I also work in a school outside of the city. And I have conversations with parents all the time, and they might, spew something that they've heard, or they might talk about something that has been on their mind, about what's been happening on X day or whatever. And believe, you can easily tell that there's a huge difference on maybe even the media that they're listening to or that they're taking in, just depending on where they're from. A lot of the parents that I'm speaking to have a very different perspective on certain things that are happening globally, and I'm seeing that 150%. So there is that urban-rural divide when it comes to that media. But again, I still do believe that it just comes down to how they're taking sides, and how it's clearly visible, just by the vocabulary. And it's all a part of trying to essentially feed into the national agendas. Like I said, the media plays a huge role in trying to put forth the state agenda, unfortunately. But it's been pretty much how things have gone for as long as pretty much humans have existed. So
what do you think are the implications? You bring up a really interesting point around the narrative and the vocabulary, like actual terminology used, and folks and their choices of media outlets. So me, for 20 years, I have been a devout supporter of Democracy Now! For international news. It's an independent news media source based out of New York. And that is my reliable international news source. And I, mind you, riddle my perspective with everything else, from CNN to Al Jazeera to local news sources on the same issue if I'm really interested. And so that's my rhythm, but that's because I am skeptical of media, skeptical of the way that the West particularly portrays incidences of the global South. And that's why I've sort of armed myself, so to speak, for lack of better terms, with news media sources that I think are far more trustable than when you have corporate media conglomerates. And so that is a really interesting, we can have a whole conversation on media quality and folks' access to that. I want to go back to this passion that you have around talking about delineating from your parents' perspective. And me being a mama, like I still, I support that. I just hope that my children equip themselves with information that is sound and clear and that they understand it. They're engaging with issues that they're passionate about, but they also understand. You have a responsibility. You don't just formulate an opinion out of thin air about people and politics. Sorry. And science and, all of these things. So if you've done your work and you've done your research and you've actually built a perspective based on balanced sources, all the power to you to go out and vote the way you want. What do you think the impact, though? Because I do think that the perspective and the perception, perhaps, or the assumption in rural Ontario is that like people just vote along the parents' party lines and not necessarily and really tied to specific issues. So agriculture being like the interest, and I think that should be protected. So I can understand that. But what do you think are the implications if that assumption is true? I didn't really dig into that. I wish you talked to me about this last night. I would have dug into it a little bit more. What do you think are the implications of like generations just sort of following suit and voting, particularly in this sort of rural urban perspective?
Yeah, so I think the major implications that we can see is we're not leaving space for change. And again, like you kind of said, that we still have to be very careful. We can't just let the next generation kind of just veer off of into kind of a nightmare. But we still have to make sure that there's spaces for the next generations to kind of make their own decisions. And I definitely think that it's a lot more possible now, and I think that a lot more people are sort of delineating from their parents' perspectives, and not immediately, but like a lot of
No, just
no, no,
I can't hear you. No, just kidding. I want this to happen, but
because I think
I'm
it's more
scared.
so the access to information.
Yes.
That's the biggest thing that I'm definitely seeing. Again, from my perspective, again, I'm not old, I'm very young, but from what I can see, as somebody who works again in schools, people are these very young children.
Yeah.
From I am mostly around grade 1s to 6s.
Yeah.
They are speaking about things that I wouldn't even imagine when I was their age. And it's because, again, it's their access to information, and their capacity to have that access to that information, and how much they're taking in. So there are pros and cons to it, but I think it's the method of how it's happening is been a pretty big problem, and that's why we're seeing, as much as we like to say that the younger generation is significantly more progressive, we are definitely seeing also a very steep rise in far right, ideologies in youth. And I can definitely say that is a very, very true picture in rural Ontario. From just the folks that I've been able to speak to, just in multiple different settings. And the implications of having that is, again, like,
No room for change. You've
there's
said it
no
best.
there's no room for change, and we're going to
Wow.
see the repeated um sort of messaging just throughout the generations, different ways to say it now,
Yeah.
but just repeated messaging told down to their told down um to younger up and coming generations. And again, with with urban living, you have the capacity to come into contact with a number of people from different perspectives of life. So what your parents might say to you might not. You'll
Yeah.
probably take their word over another person's.
It'll roll off your back.
And,
Is that what?
every word here and there again might roll off your back, and you might take what your teacher said into more consideration, or you might take what your friend said, from X place that might have a different way of living, whatever, into more consideration, which will completely frame how you see things. But if
Yeah.
you're living in a pretty much a homogenous rural community with pretty much all with the same messaging, you're not going to have that same room for change. You're not going to have that same room for kind of different perspectives. So it's, I think, again, it plays down to there's not a lot of room for change. And again, with young people, you want to have them engaged so that
Yeah.
they can make that room for change. But it's hard. It's hard.
I agree. So you're 21. You
Mhm.
said, you once said to me you'd even go deeper in the country.
Oh,
Like we joke about being in fake country. So is that true? Like it's still 2.5 years later, and because at first you loved this, you were just rolling around in the back saying like, I just want to see trees and animals,
yeah.
no more people, despite it being COVID. Like, so if you lived here, first of all, if you lived in this home in this community, in 2020 in full lockdown, first of all, would you have the same perspective and would you stay?
Well, it kind of boils down to the timing of things.
Yeah.
So if we were to kind of have early 2020 happen now while we have fiber internet, I would be fine. But
Oh,
you have to
right.
remember that at the
Oh
time
my
we didn't
gosh,
have internet
yes.
around
Oh
here.
my gosh, I can't believe I asked you.
So
Yeah.
it I don't know. That might have been a make or break for me if I would have enjoyed it the same. But hypothetically, let's say we're in the same position. If I were to choose this house that we currently have, or the house that we had in London before, or the house in Ottawa, I would still take this house. And I would go again. Yes, I would go deeper in the country. For me, um, it's again like, and honestly, I really do believe it's the access to information. I think it boils down to that access to information, because a lot of people have a lot to say,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of the things that they say is pretty mind boggling.
Yeah.
Especially in my classes. I mean, I'm talking about politics day in and day out. I'm meeting people each and every day with their own perspective on things, and they're saying and I'm not saying that each there's a an opinion that's wrong or perspective that's wrong, right? But like, and I don't want to, right? But um, I just like to have that privacy.
That access to the information.
Yeah.
Okay, so for you, so now that if you were to do your research,
Mhm.
so this wouldn't be true retention, because let's say like this county would lose you, but you may be in a different county that has perhaps been a little bit more sort of invested in, has more infrastructure set up, because that's what I'm hearing. Like we just got fibered a few months ago and our lives have changed,
Yeah.
I think.
No.
Financially, we've spent a lot less on internet, and all of us have far more hair on our heads, because we can now, more than one device can operate at the same time, and reasonably so. So should there be adequate infrastructure, you could possibly be retained for your lifetime in the county. Is that what you're saying to me?
Well, absolutely. Like
I love this. Okay.
my ambitions are to stay in county life. If
Can I
not,
have that in writing? I mean, maybe.
absolutely. Obviously, I've for a lot of people who don't know, I definitely had my moments where I wanted to grasp onto that Ottawa life, but and I still do. I
Yeah.
still definitely do. I would love to move back to Ottawa at some point. But I wouldn't move directly back into the city, nor would I move back into suburban life. I would probably kind of look for the same vibe that I have here.
Fake country.
I guess fake country, right outside of Ottawa, in the the surrounding counties out there. where I can set up a life, a comfortable, quiet life,
Yeah.
outside of all of the unfortunate things that do happen, within the larger cities. Um,
Just have your mom's room set up, and I'm there. I'm game. I'll support that as long as I have my
yeah,
little nook. I don't have a whole. I don't even need a whole room. I just need a little nook.
yeah. And again, this is coming from like you mentioned before. This is coming from somebody who's had the privilege of being able to experience both urban and rural, who's had the capacity to move out of the city at the time that we did.
Yeah.
And it's not like we were initially looking for something in the city. Like, it's
Yeah.
not like we were trying to find something rural, but it was kind of a blessing in disguise that we moved out here, and did this at the time that we did it, because again, um, with everything that was going on economically and with housing, it was
Yeah.
a struggle, and a lot of people, I can't imagine, were experiencing the very same things, but again, still didn't have the same privilege and opportunity that we did have to be able to find something that was gonna fit what we needed. Uh,
Agreed. So, we talked earlier on, you touched on infrastructure around internet service. You're like, as long as I get fiber, if I had fiber during the pandemic,
yeah,
I'd live in the county all day, every day. Okay, me too. I can't believe I asked that question. Like, I almost got hives again thinking about, because all the kids were homeschooled, right? Like, it was just such a
it was,
stressful time where everyone was online,
yeah, it
right?
was,
Your first year university was all online.
and I was cramped up. We again, back to the whole privacy thing. In urban life, I couldn't go outside,
No,
and do whatever I would like. I
yeah,
would I would be cramped up in my room, literally 24/7 in classes.
yeah. Well, I mean,
And
not 24/7.
well,
But I know what you're saying.
yeah,
I know what you're
it was a
saying. It
lot of
was pretty.
time. Yeah, um, and I didn't have the same liberty to go outside and enjoy some fresh air and privacy, and be kind of secluded away from other people. You go outside, you can see the person living across just behind you. But if I were to be living here with the same Wi-Fi, I could go outside and take my classes. I could go outside and enjoy my fresh air between classes, whatever. I could have done that in Ottawa, but I mean, I
A
really
different feeling. We're in a
way,
fishbowl.
yeah, a huge fishbowl, and that's the difference. And I think a lot of people nowadays, especially after COVID, are now valuing that time alone and that time away from people, especially since they had so much time away from people. A lot of people don't want to go back to having that, being in those spaces where they've got hundreds of people around them every day, all day. A lot of people are now realizing that work from home is a great thing. Um, everything from home is a great thing, whatever. And they're starting to see the value of wanting to live that private life, and that's why we're seeing a lot of people, aside from the economic side of things, are moving out into rural communities because they value having that privacy, that seclusion, and sort of away from everybody. And especially since during COVID, the bigger cities were just epicenters for COVID. Like,
Yes.
there was a lot of infection.
Uh,
So it's
yeah, we're talking from a very privileged lens, though.
well,
Like we,
I can't reiterate that enough. Like,
right?
we're talking from a lens where we've had the capacity to, again, at the right time, and with the right capacity to be able to make that move and speak from this perspective, because I know there's a lot of people that needed to be in this in our position, but unfortunately could not, um, and did not find themselves in those positions. So
For
absolutely.
sure. I mean, you and I are kind of like trained extroverts, but we're really like deep introverts. Even with each other, we're like, hello, we love each
Yeah,
other for the time that we can, and then we like our isolated time, right? So not everyone's like that. Like you're saying, there's a lot of folks that feel uncomfortable. Like we went to the Business Achievement Awards, we're like, wow, this room is really full. It's awesome. But also like it's really full. And great on the chamber for bringing everybody out. On just our introverted selves, we're like, do we
yeah,
still do this? And yeah, of course we can.
yeah,
Now we're fully vaxxed and we take precautions. still, but I think it comes from a place of privilege to say that this isolation was a good thing, and being in further isolation to the isolation is even a better thing. We're a bit of a strange bunch that loves that. I've learned when I'm speaking with my colleagues in community. I want to go back a few steps. So curious if you want to touch on further on the infrastructure, because this is really interesting, because I want us to kind of have a call to action. Like, what can we do? We talked about all the good things. We're bigging up the county. We want more people to come into the county, utilize the county for what it's worth. But I want us to touch on this deep inequity. So the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, the FCM, a report, I think this came out a couple of years ago. I had a hard time finding the date on this one, but it's called Rural Challenges, National Opportunity, Shaping the Future of Rural Canada. And it said that municipalities own nearly 2/3 of core infrastructure assets. Okay? Own core infrastructure assets like roads, bridges, water, and wastewater facilities that are critical to Canadians' quality of life and being competitive as a nation. Yet many rural municipalities with limited tax bases and capacity struggle to meet their infrastructure needs. So, for example, if we were down and out and really having a hard time financially, and we wanted to utilize more of our land to grow food, on our septic, we wouldn't really be able to dig up that land in the same way. We can find alternatives. We have plant boxes. That's what Daddy grows stuff in, but we wouldn't have that. I guess what I want to speak to is that let's look at this through the lens of folks who are not coming from a privileged perspective, that don't have the option of going into town for amenities. Let's talk about this inequity. So we just said 27% contribution to GDP. If that's how we want to gauge people's value and worth, fine. It is how people do in this capitalistic system. So let's talk that. What's next then? How do we, as we're anticipating this 5 to 10 year urban sprawl into the counties, how do we then advocate so that we can uphold everyone and be able to maintain everyone and sustain everyone and retain folks in a good way, and not create another massive problem?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? What's next? You said 5 to 10 years, right?
Yeah,
did I remember that correctly? Okay.
Honestly, I believe 5 to 10 years we're going to see that urban sprawl pretty much knocking on our front door. And I think that's when we're going to start to see the call-outs, when people start coming out here and realizing that we don't have the same things that you might find in your neighborhood in the city. They're going to start to collectively call out the provincial government or the county government to come out and put in the amenities that we need. And I think that's the only way that we're going to see it. I mean, we see it. We're a lot of the counties are neglected. A lot of the communities in Ontario, just rural Canada in general, if you're saying that 27% of our GDP is coming from rural communities, yet, what did you say was the metric for how many of the infrastructural assets do cities own?
2/3
so
of core infrastructure assets. Yeah.
If we're putting above it's, I don't know, we have to see especially in our specific position. We're down the road from two schools. We have the infrastructure here, but we don't have sewage. Mm-hmm. And we're contributing greatly to to the economies, and we're not seeing that put back into our communities. And again,
what do we do?
It comes down to having that urban sprawl come here. I think that's what it's.
Oh, really? I don't know.
I think that's what it's going to have to come down to. I mean,
so you're saying encourage people to come from the city so that we can have better infrastructure. Is that what you're saying?
They didn't have better infrastructure until more people came here. We didn't get the internet until more people moved here.
Okay. No, that is true. That took a long time.
It took a long time.
So what do you... Okay, so you want to know where I'm... Look, my face is getting hot just talking about this, because I feel like we're going to trade an old problem with a new one. What do you think that new problem would be?
No, we are definitely trading. But again, we have to look at it in the perspective of how they're looking at it. the biggest thing, the reason why we had Quadro come in was because other companies didn't see that for our population that we would be giving them the value of what they would be giving us. So we have to look at it in that perspective.
Oh, people before profits. What a concept. People before profits.
But unfortunately they see profits before people. So, you know, we've had our council members go out and vouch for these things to be put into our community. You know, for example, Wi-Fi, and an actual cable network. But companies didn't want to do it because our community wouldn't give them the margins that they would want to see out of a community.
Yeah.
So they refused to do it.
And maybe do you think it has anything to do with like, oh, you know, we're gonna the family lineage is this, this community is typically like this, so we can, you know, corporations don't really have a whole lot of like consequence if they don't come in and set up shop and better serve our population, right? I think they can kind of assume that what will continue.
Yeah.
What is will continue to be rather, and then, you know, maybe just not have any consequence. So wait until the value goes up for them. They can mass the profit and off they go to providing the resource. So really it does mean more engaged folks delineating from your parents' perspective, if that's what has been there for generations, relatively thoughtlessly. So as things change, so you're saying bring people in. Here's my big question. And I don't know if you remember me coming home and talking about this after a different sort of conversation about innovation. Because I was asked, if you remember, can we bring back the simplicity of like Mr. Rogers, Mr. Dress Up? The old, you probably have never even seen footage of this stuff in your life. Have you?
Maybe. Rogers?
Oh, wow.
Mr. Rogers? I think so.
Yeah. Okay. So the question that was posed to me was, do you think, you know, we could go back to the simple things? And immediately in my mind, I thought, I love innovation, but before we truly get to hardcore acting out our innovative ideas, we should have a conversation of what must be preserved across anything, all industries, no matter what kind of product, service, what kind of idea it is. So that's my lens. Innovation is necessary when you bring new people in. You're thinking pretty creatively, saying, you know what, encourage people to come, teach them how to be in the county. Great. What do you think, though, as we're doing that, must we protect with all dear life? And I think, you know, this will be a good point to leave on, because I think that there's a lesson behind what we can talk about preserving versus innovating. And it doesn't have to be this or that. It can be both at the same time. We can innovate while we preserve things. What is that one thing? If you were to say, you know, one thing from rural life that we should protect and preserve, what should that be?
And it has to be a mix between our agricultural sector and the environment. I actually got to speak, you know, about climate change briefly in one of my classes, and yeah, one of the big things that we have to do is it's inevitable. Like our population here in Canada is growing. You know, we've gone up millions in the past, like five years or so. You know, we've gone up a substantial amount, and we need to make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that rising population. But while we have to make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that, we also have to make sure that it's being done in climate, you know,
aware of climate change.
Yeah, you have to environmentally friendly friendly ways. You have to make sure that you're paying attention to the ecology in the area. You have to make sure that you're being mindful of everything that's going on. You have to make sure that the jobs that you're giving out are green. You have to make sure that the jobs and I mean, you have to make sure the jobs are green. You have to also make sure that you're giving you know, these newly built resources, the new infrastructure, make sure that they're given out to people with equitably. You have to make sure that people have the access to this infrastructure. You can't build up, what do they call it, McMansions up in rural, in the
I
rural,
like that.
in the rural.
I like it and I don't. Like, ew, gross, but
Yeah.
also say more.
I'm driving down to this other community that I work in, and all along you just see these newly built McMansions. I'm like, who can afford these in this day and age, right?
And it's in the county, so
And
they're
it's
now turning the benefit of having some space and some safety, in with respect to the where the houses are spaces apart. You're not seeing that. I've noticed that too in the county here.
So it's
okay. So no to that. You want to bring people in, but sustainably. Let's not do the McMansions.
Let's not do the McMansions. But yeah,
I'm going to say that word 6 times this week now, Darius, because I think it's a great term.
Really, yeah. Like to really sum up what I have to say, I think we have to do it sustainably, and we have to make sure that, yes, the preservation is absolutely important, but I think what we have to do, we can't fall too far into this whole notion of trying to preserve things, because people and things will change naturally.
Yeah. Can I give you an example of what I'm thinking about preservation with respect to this question?
Yeah.
Buying, you like your country eggs, eh? You like your farm eggs?
No.
You told me you can't go back now, right? So let's not forget that we need to also support. Let's not go and then build the McGrocers in the county, because we have very few that are not monocropping and providing local food. Let's protect those folks providing local food and providing value to our local food supply and production. So that to me is the one thing in rural Ontario that I hope that we preserve, and the importance of that. Buying local food is so important. I'm paying more attention to it in this phase of my life now that I'm where I'm at in life and thinking about what I'm consuming in a different way. That's my thought. Well,
but then
go ahead.
What I wanted to say to that point is, like, how do we ensure that, again, like, we're speaking from a privileged perspective. Like, we have to be able to take into mind that not a lot of people have that access to, having, that local grower that is able to, because again, like, you also have to think that there's immediate labor that is being put into that, right? And it's I'm not saying that we can't support, like, we have the capacity to go and support all the local growers around here.
Yes.
Not everybody does. They would rather take the super cheap eggs that, don't have anything that's coming from Walmart. That's why they would vouch for Walmart or whatever, Loblaws or whatever.
For the affordability piece component.
Especially in today's day and age. So I think that's what a lot of people are seeing. And again, we're also, because I've spoken to people that, they're seeing that less and less people are coming out and supporting their local shops. And it's because, again, like,
they can't afford it.
They can't afford the fact that, maybe whatever the produce that they're selling, or their any services that they're selling, or products that they're selling isn't, is more expensive, because again, you have to admit, like, they want to make sure that they can also survive, that they can also. So it's a, I don't know, in my perspective of being in my classes and in my perspective, it's been something that we've been talking about for weeks. This has been a big issue, with affordability. How our domestic policies and our domestic social environments and our foreign social environments affect every walk of life, no matter what you think or say. And you have to think about it from a number of different perspectives. So I don't know.
Well, a couple of things I want in writing. You're going to stay in the countryside. You're going to build me a little nook in your home. And though you will delineate from your parents' voting patterns, you'll do so with great caution and research and perspective taking.
Absolutely.
Great. So how has this been? We'll do this again? We'll do this again, maybe?
Yeah. It wasn't bad.
It wasn't. Tell me how you really feel.
No, I'm joking. No, like, it was I really did enjoy it. I really did enjoy it.
Awesome.
I'd be able to see what other topics we'd be able to to come up with and
tackle. Awesome. Well, I think on behalf of both of us, we want to say a huge thank you to Radar Media and to Clearing the Path podcast, and of course our super host Shauna. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.